Let's talk about underwear. Underwear is important for people who work in costumes because underwear helps to create the shape and the zeitgeist, the feeling of a time period. There are five basic historical functions of underclothing, and those are protection, creating shape, cleanliness, eroticism, and class distinction. Let's discuss these now. Protection. Throughout most of human history, we haven't had central heating. And so layers of clothing became important for protecting from the weather. Also, with 95 to 99% of human population living in poverty, clothing wasn't soft. It was homespun, it was wool, it was scratchy. And so underclothing also protected you from the outer clothing. In the Western world, the traditional men's underwear was a shirt, and that is the Old English spelling there, Sherte. And the traditional women's underclothing was the chemise, or sometimes called a shift. It depends on what language you are translating from. But basically, these are the garments that we think of as going underneath period clothing. Okay. And this shirt is the precursor to what is now the men's white dress shirt. The clothing changed and the undergarments changed. Sometimes the undergarments had collars, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they had ruffles, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they were ankle length, knee length, or hip length. Sometimes the sleeves were longer, sometimes the sleeves were fuller. If you look at undershirts from, say, the area of the world we think of as Turkey in the 15th century, and shirts that we think of as being from the country of France in that same time period, you'll see that the sleeves are different, that they may be the same length and they may have standing collars on them, but they have different techniques for cutting and sewing the fabric together. So there are a lot of regional and cultural specifics to underwear, but in theater, we need to create something that can be used for many different time periods. And so these two shapes are very common shapes that you will find in theater costume storages. Creating shape and supporting shape. So underwear is where we get into the distorted clothing shape, that center picture of peignets. Peignet is the French word for hip baskets. And they're called peignets because that style started in France. But obviously, it exaggerates the hips on women. They weren't worn by men. And that was creates the look of that time period. Throughout history, this has mostly been seen as being used by women, but even today, you can find men's shapewear that is meant to reduce the size of the waist and enhance the size of the chest. The thing about creating shape is that it also creates mystery, the mystique of what's under there. Is it really that size? Cleanliness. We talked a lot about cleanliness in the lecture about how to do laundry. The thing about underwear is underwear not only protects your outer clothing from your skin, but it also protects your skin from your outer clothing. If you're wearing itchy wool clothing, how nice it would be to have something soft next to your skin. So it was also protecting your skin. Physical cleanliness, actually, bathing on a daily basis, was not popularized until we get into the 19th century. In the early 1800s, there was a fashionista whose name is Beau Brummel. If your grandmother has ever said, "Oh, do you have a beau?" that comes from his name, Beau Brummel. Beau is credited with two things. One, making it popular to clean your entire body by getting in the bathtub at least once a week and putting clean underwear on a daily basis. Remember, again, let's talk about the majority of the world in the early 1800s, the population of the world lived in abject poverty. There wasn't money for 2 sets of clothing, let alone 7 sets of underwear and the time and energy to wash that underwear frequently so that it was clean when you put it on the next day. Most people had 1 set of clothing and you only took it off when it was warm. And so it didn't get cleaned that frequently, particularly if you didn't have a fire to hang it next to so it would dry quickly. But Beau is credited with saying people should bathe more frequently and they should change their underwear. This is also where we get into that Victorian era of having the white collar and the white cuffs. That idea that cleanliness is next to godliness and white clothing shows that you are clean. It actually wasn't until after World War I that we start wearing clothing, and by we, I'm talking about the Western world, start wearing clothing that actually touches the skin. Think about it. Think about what you are wearing right now. How much of your skin is touching the clothing that other people see, and how much of your skin has an undergarment between it and your outer clothing. That has changed dramatically just in the last 100 years. So thinking about how clothing and underwear and the social conditioning of what is expected has changed over the years. But if you look at simply colonization, if you look at class distinction, you're looking at the idea of we're clean, you're not, therefore we are better than you. Okay, let's move on to eroticism. Underwear was not anything that was considered erotic until we get into the Victorian era. In the Victorian era, for a woman to reveal any part of her undergarments symbolized an act of getting undressed. And if you were thinking about a woman getting undressed, then, oh no, you were thinking about bad things. Underwear equaled sin. And it's a really interesting thing because in that Victorian era, you'll notice furniture changes. Furniture changes. If you look at your sofa right now, can you see the legs on your sofa? If you have an easy chair, do you see the wooden legs that your easy chair is sitting on? Or does it have a skirt around it that hides those legs? That happened in the Victorian era because if you could see the legs on your furniture, then you were probably thinking about the legs on people. And if you were thinking about the legs on people, then you were probably thinking about what's between the legs on people. And so therefore, you couldn't look at legs on anything. You couldn't talk about legs. They didn't use the word leg. They would use euphemisms for the word leg so that nobody was having an improper thought. It's really quite fascinating. But throughout history, underwear has changed to match the garments of the period. Sometimes you might have a high neckline, sometimes a low neckline, sometimes long sleeves, sometimes short sleeves. And when your clothing was too tight to have underwear underneath it, like that painting in the center there. Then simply lace would be sewn on, so it looked like you had underwear on. So lace around the collar. A little girl's dress with a white lace collar, that white lace collar is vestigial to showing your white lace underwear at the collar of your dress. Sewing lace at the bottom of a dress is vestigial to being able to see a chemise or a petticoat at the hem of a dress. Throughout most of history, women's legs were covered. And so what happens when dresses start to get shorter? Shoes get taller. Shoes have to be taller so that you can't see the ankle. And so it continues that not shoes, shoes are covering it. The ankles and knees are considered an extremely erotic part of the body throughout much of Western history. Generally, until the 15th century, men and women wear either their chemise or their shirt or nothing at all to bed. The advent of a nightgown is credited to Lucretia Borgia in around 1450, and she actually had many when she passed away that she left behind. But it wasn't until we get to 1450 that we have clothing specifically made to sleep in. And remember, you had to be very wealthy to be able to have a second set of clothes that's only purpose was to wear it to bed. Nightwear was generally not real appealing. It was not considered sexy. It was what we would think of as a granny nightgown. And it isn't until the advent of birth control that we begin to see respectable women wearing something that might be considered erotic to sleep in. Interestingly enough, men's daily use underwear is generally considered utilitarian and not erotic. The corset is seen as the most erotic piece of underwear. And why is that? Well, the purpose of a corset is to diminish the size of the waist and accentuate the bosom. And so, of course, that is why it is considered an erotic undergarment. Even in the time periods when men wore corsets, and there are time periods where men who would be considered fashionistas wore corsets, the objective was to make the waist smaller and to make the chest larger to accentuate that shape. But generally speaking, during the past 600 years, women have almost continuously used some form of underwear to change the shape of their body. The bustle added to the back. Breast pads would give oomph to the bosom. Peignets and hip pads were used. And even in the 20th century, we have the Wonder Bra. Remember, different times equal different obsessions. Concealing something leads to it being fascinating. Displaying it leads to a loss of mystery. So in that 18th century painting there, you'll notice that the bodice of the gown is very low cut. In the upper classes, they were extremely low cut, sometimes to the point that the nipples of the breasts would peek out of the garments. And so that part, the décolletage, was not considered erotic. But notice that the elbow is hidden in multiple layers of lace, and you had to search for it. And so you had to yearn for a glimpse of the elbow. In that time period, a different time, there was a different obsession. And because it was somewhat hidden, it became fascinating. Class distinction. Now, while eroticism tends to be what we think of with women's underwear, class distinction in the Western world is what we see as being distinctive about men's underwear. Again, this goes back to that Victorian ideal of cleanliness is next to godliness. And if I am wearing white, I am better than you. The shirt actually is showing in men's clothing as early as the 1400s. We see the shirt in fashionable clothing. So we're seeing the undershirt. So the whiter the undershirt is, it shows that you don't do manual labor. You have a white shirt, or you have enough money to have more than one shirt. So your shirt is always white and able to be kept clean. Even today, men's underwear is sold as white. You wear, this is an image of a gentleman in a white A shirt. The tank top is called an A shirt. Or you might have just a standard cotton blend, short sleeved, high necked undershirt. But they're still sold as white. We talk of men's underwear as tighty whities. Now, we've moved away from that, and we've moved away from them being strictly white. Now we see boxers, we see boxer briefs, and we see them in many different colors. But think about the majority of the 20th century, men's underwear was white, and it was up to the woman to keep her man's underwear bright and white. So we see several images here of the man's white collar showing, and we see so class distinction. If you had a white shirt versus a blue collar shirt, think what is a white collar job and what is a blue collar job? That is where this comes from, showing class distinction in your underclothing. So what materials were underclothing made of? Well, the earliest underclothing was made from linen. Now, linen has several benefits. It's soft, it's light, and it was inexpensive. And rich people and poor people all had linen underwear. It might be different weights, but that is what they wore. It isn't until we get into the mid 17th century that cotton becomes popular in underwear. And remember, cotton is very absorbent, and can be a little heavier than linen. Before the 17th century, cotton would be used by the lower classes, but the upper classes felt that it was inferior to linen, and so they had linen underwear. Wool is often used in underwear. However, wool can be very itchy. So it might be used as your second layer. So you might have a layer of soft linen or cotton next to your skin. And then a woman might have a heavy wool petticoat. A man might have a wool vest that he wore over top of that. It was an extra layer for warmth, or you might simply have your wool clothing. Silk was not used, or was very rarely used as underwear until we get into the late 19th century. So late Victorian era. Remember, silk was very expensive. It was hard to get. And so you didn't want to waste it on underwear. You would use it for your outer garments. How did these close? Well, in theater, we might put elastic in the wrist or elastic in the neck. But originally, they had ribbon and string drawstrings. So string or ribbon would be used to create a drawstring. Eventually, we do see shank buttons, and of course, in the mid-19th century, flat buttons begin to appear. Imagine this, up through World War I, men's boxer shorts didn't have elastic in the waist. They had a yoke, like a skirt, they had a waistband on them, and that waistband closed with buttons. Flat buttons on your underwear to close your button. There was no getting any of this off quickly. Zippers don't appear in clothing until the 1930s. And there are actually extant slips from the 1930s that still exist that actually have zippers in them. And of course, hooks and eyes are used throughout time because as soon as we could make wire and we could bend it, we could create hooks and eyes. One thing I want to talk about is the cuff link. Cuff links and studs. A tuxedo shirt with studs in it. If you've ever rented a tuxedo or you know what a tuxedo shirt looks like with those removable studs, those are essentially removable buttons. So for a wife to have to iron a shirt, so tuxedo shirts come from the early to mid Victorian era when men's shirts had lots of pleats on the front of them. A maid or a wife had to iron all of those pleats every time that shirt was washed. And in order to do that, you had to work around buttons. So they created removable buttons, which are what we think as cufflinks and studs on their shirts. It just made life easier for the person doing laundry. So basically, men's underclothing in the Western world is used to show class distinction. Women's clothing, underclothing in the Western world expresses eroticism, but both of them create the shape of the time period. Changes in underwear happen with changes in fashion. Sometimes we're showing off the underwear, sometimes we're trying to draw attention to a specific area of the body, and sometimes it can be a form of rebellion to show your underwear. The first time Madonna walked out on stage at a concert with her bra on the outside, huge outcry. Oh my goodness, how could she do that? Underwear used as rebellion. Early underwear was utilitarian, and there was very little difference between the upper and lower classes. But eventually, we start to see underwear as being used as class distinction, and eventually it is a weapon of the colonizer and of the person who is saying, I am better than you because I have clean underwear on. Also, if you're thinking about underwear, you are thinking about the human body. And if you are thinking about the human body, you are about to commit a sin. It's another way of controlling people. It's interesting that originally, to appear in your underwear, you wore just your shirt or your shift as a sign of penance as you were walking on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. But eventually that reversed and it became a punishment to be pushed out into public in nothing but your shirt or your chemise. It's very interesting that transformation from it being, I am showing that I am, what's the word for it? I'm showing a sense of humility by appearing as lesser, to I am humiliating you by showing you as lesser. It's an interesting change of how underwear and the idea of underwear changes throughout Western culture, and how even in the Victorian era, the thought of underwear changes furniture and how furniture is manufactured and built and displayed. So that is why underwear is so important for design in the theater, and particularly costume design in the theater.